Good morning, oh, that's good. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to all of you for getting up on this snow-dusty morning for a change. We're really honored to have you all here this morning, and particularly our honored guests, Molly Burke, Sarah Edwards, Mike Hebert, Dick Merrick, John Moran, Valerie Stewart, and Jeanette White and Peter Galbraith. So we've got a full house this morning and a full agenda. Carolyn Partridge couldn't be here this morning. She asked that we tell you that she's working on House Bill 496, and as a matter of fact, there's a piece on that in this morning's Reformer, so she was confident that you'd all get to know what she's been up to. And Michael Wicke and Oliver Olson send their apologies. They had prior commitments and couldn't be with us this morning. One thing I'd like to ask is if anybody's here for the first time who's never been to one of our legislative breakfasts this morning, if you don't mind, you guys stand up and just say hello, tell us who you are and where you're from, so everybody can get to see you and meet you. Hi, good morning.
Hi, I'm Jane Wood from Vermont Independent Media, the Commons newspaper, and it's great to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, Jane.
I'm Pat Kavanaugh from Marlborough College undergrad campus.
Thank you, coming. Thanks, Pat.
Bob Allen, the Wyndham Foundation.
Welcome, Bob.
Jolene Belair,
Excuse me?
Jolene Belair, I'm on the board of directors.
Hi, Jolene. Nice to see you.
Dave Altstadt with the Wyndham Workforce Investment Board.
Hi, Dave. Good to see you again.
Rebecca Reuter, Lakey Healing Arts.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for coming. So good. Here's how today's going to work. I'm going to be running around with this, and Stacy Kritzis is going to be moderating the proceedings this morning. So with that, without further ado, I would invite Stacy to come up here and take the helm, sir.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Downs Ragland Martin and the Richards Group for helping us sponsor this event. We try to have 2 of these events a year, when the session starts and when the session ends, so that we can get input as to what's going on in our state. Here's how it's going to work this morning. We're going to ask each representative and senator to give us 4 to 5 minute speech as to what's going on in their committees and other activities that they're involved in. You can do it, senators and reps can do it from their tables, or you can come up here if you'd like to talk. There'll be time at the end for questions. That's why we've left little notepads and pens on the tables. And we'll start out with the representatives and finish off with the senators. And I guess the best way to do this is to start off alphabetically. So we'll start with Molly Burke.
Thank you for inviting me here. I am on the Transportation Committee. I've just in my 4th year in the legislature, and all of them I've been on the Transportation Committee. And of course, this is a big year because of the tropical storm Irene. And the transportation budget reflects that. There's the largest ever transportation budget in the state, $650 million. And that includes, I think there's definitely a recognition that towns really need help. And the budget reflects that in specific ways, and increased funding for Town Highway Emergency Fund and for the general town highway grants. If you want more specifics, I can give those. And then also I want to say we had a joint hearing where we heard from the private contractors who worked with the state on Irene repairs. And that was really interesting, a joint House hearing where there were a lot of, it was called Irene Lessons Learned, and it was sort of a dialogue between hearing from the contractors what worked, what didn't. Everybody said it was an amazing sort of coming together of private contractors in the state, and how can we continue that to make sure that on certain jobs that the private contractors don't feel sort of micromanaged, but they have the expertise of the state. So that was a very, very interesting conversation, and I think it will continue to inform work as we go forward. There is something in the T-bill right now that was going to reduce the local match. One of the issues that they talked about is that it's so much easier and quicker and cheaper if you are working on a bridge, either replacing or repairing it, to close that bridge and to work with the community to do that. And there are some incentives in the transportation bill where the state would have to pay, this town would pay a smaller match if they agreed to close the bridge. And that was successful apparently in Chester this summer where they did that, and they found that the cost of doing a replacement bridges and all these other costs made it a little bit they're finding that closing a bridge might be the best way, not in all cases, but working with the community. So those are sort of conversations that are going on at the State House about coming from the Irene experience. The other things that I'm working on are, I'm on the Public Transit Advisory Committee, and we are facing some cuts in the public transit budget for the transit providers, cuts in the Medicaid funding for transporting people, Medicaid patients who need help getting to doctors, and that's sort of a concern. You don't know where that's going to go. And there's also Greyhound. I don't know if any of you heard, but it looks like Greyhound is not going to be running their one-day-a-week bus to Brattleboro, starting in a month or two. And there are some other possibilities of other companies that are coming forth trying to fill that gap. So that's just something to be aware of. I know that there are certain businesses that do depend on having people be able to take a Greyhound type of bus from elsewhere to get to Brattleboro. Rail is a big conversation, and I think that Brattleboro could really capitalize more on what's going on in rail. Within 3 years, the state wants to have talks with Quebec to actually have the train go all the way to Montreal, which would be really wonderful. And they need to build a facility, an immigration facility, but I think that that is really going to happen. And there's a commitment on both sides of the border for that. And the other thing is, in-state, and I don't know how many in this room know, but if you take a train in Vermont, it costs $12. And that has not really been marketed. I think that's something Brattleboro could market. I happened to be at a reception and talked to a chiropractor from Essex and said he loves to come to Brattleboro with his family. They come on the train, they stay overnight here, they do things here, they came down for the heifer stroll, for other things. I think that even people from upstate can come down to Brattleboro for the day and go back because of the train schedule. You can't do it the other way. But I think that the state, and I've been talking to the rail director, really needs to market that fare, but I think that's something that Brattleboro can market, and in markets in New York and Boston, well, New York, basically, actually that fare doesn't hold for going to New York, but still, to market the rail, Brattleboro as a rail destination. The station is right here, people can get off and walk, and I have met a couple of other people in town, just happened to be talking to them, and somebody came up from New York, they rent a car, they went skiing, etc. That was a couple of years ago, but that's just sort of an opportunity that I think to help our local economy. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is what you mentioned, Carolyn Partridge, working on the Working Lands Investment Enterprise Bill. I'm a sponsor of that. It's very exciting. It's a job creation. And I think if you read Carolyn's column this morning, you'll get more information. But I think there's no money in the budget for it right now because it came a little later. But it's investing $3 million in the forestry, ag, and value-added businesses to preserve our working landscape, which is what tourists come to see, and to make it possible for people for entrepreneurs, young farmers, young foresters, value-added businesses to actually make a living. We talk about that a lot, and this is actually putting some money there. And one more thing I want to encourage. We passed a bill. You may have seen the governor's signing. This is the Vermont Strong license plate. And this is being marketed $25. It's a fundraiser for the Vermont Disaster Relief Fund. And the Vermont Disaster Relief Fund is a fund that's going to try to put money back for individuals for whom they did not get reimbursed from FEMA or for the full cost of their losses. The state wants to make all those people whole. I think they're $18 of this is going to go towards the Vermont Disaster Relief Fund, $2 to the Vermont Food Bank, and the rest, the $5 goes to the cost of producing it. You can put it on the front of your car. You can put it on your mantelpiece. You can put it anywhere. Give them to friends. I think it'll be a collector's item, and it's a real big push by the state to raise money for this private fund. So I want to encourage people. I don't know where they are going to be on sale in Brattleboro yet. I think a number of groceries and places like that are going to be selling them. But you can go to vtstrong.vermont.gov and either find out where they are or order them online. So I just really wanted to put a plug for that, because it's so much of our conversation this year has been about the effects of this tropical storm and how can we as a state pull together, and we have pulled together in an amazing way. And here's another way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Next, we'd like to hear from Sarah Edwards.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Delighted to be here. And when I walked here this morning, I was grateful to see a little bit of snow in the air. It's been a while. And I'm sure our ski areas would love to see a whole bunch of it come down. First, I would like to say that Representative Mike Hebert and I serve on the same committee, so I don't know, he'll fill in where I left off, and then I can refill in where he left off, I suppose. We've had a very interesting start this year. We've been going through several bills that have taken a lot to sort of flesh out, and some of it we're not even there yet. But I'll just run through what we have done and talk about the more complex issues that are coming up for us. One bill that we passed already is a bill that makes improvements on net metering. And for people who don't know what net metering it is, that's when you as a homeowner or a business or a nonprofit, that you generate more electricity than you use, and you can sell that back to the grid. So we made improvements on net metering. One of the things was last year we said that we could just do a registration process, except for going through, normally what we would have done is gone through a whole certificate of public good process, and we realized that we really don't need that much administration around small local projects. And so we graduated from, we instituted 5 kilowatt projects, which are really small kilowatt projects. But what we found out is that most projects that are local are 7 kilowatts. So we weren't serving anybody with that, but that was based on feedback the next year, and that's why this is often a give and take process. So what we did was we allowed registration now up to 10 kilowatts. So that covers the 7 and anybody who happens to have a 5. So up to 10 kilowatts, you can just register your project. That should help a lot. There were other things included in that improvement bill, but they get very wonky, and I'm not going to take your time describing them right now. Another thing that we're working on is the Renewable Portfolio Standard. What that tells us is that Vermonters over several years have told us that they are really interested in supporting renewable energy projects. What this does, and this is part of the dilemma, is that part of what has spawned our thriving and growing renewable energy industry in the state is the fact that we were able to sell the renewable energy credits from those projects out of state. So it was a source of revenue for the companies and the developers who were trying to get these things deployed and also soften the rate impact. And so every state around us has a renewable portfolio standard. We've had a modified one, but they're a little annoyed with us because we did it, I think, in a much more entrepreneurial way. And I was kind of proud of Vermonters for coming up with this idea to support this industry, which, by the way, is a large generator of jobs in the state there. For example, I found one business that Northern Power up in Barry, Vermont, that employs 100 people. And they also have relationships with 350 other businesses to accomplish their goals. So we can see this as an economic development opportunity. We have a new comprehensive energy plan that says that we need to do an awful lot of renewables by 2090. I think it's an ambitious goal, maybe not impossible, but it's important to have goals. The other thing that I think would be of interest to this group, one of my favorite topics, is a statewide integrated solid waste management plan. We have been talking about this for a while. It will affect municipalities. for a very long time. And Irene, like so many other things that Molly was describing, has helped push us toward getting more active and ambitious on this, because our two landfills have a very short lifetime left. One of them up in Morristown has 18 months. Because just think about all the debris that went into those landfills. So we have an ambitious plan of banning renewables, yard and leaf waste, and organics from our landfills coming up. And that plan also is in flux, so watch for that. Other than that, I think I can cease.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Mike Hebert.
Thank you. I think I will move on. Being in a minority, you don't like to have your back to anybody. First of all, I'd like to say I wish Oliver Olson were here, because he's on Ways and Means. And it would be very nice to hear from him, because there are some issues that concern one of our larger businesses around here, tax structures and fee structures. And we have some grave concerns about those. One being in the fee bill, there's a 417% increase proposed for the discharge of water from Vermont Yankee. I've yet to have anybody be able to justify why that's going up so significantly, but I want to get more information on that. And Oliver's been tracking that down. And also the tax package, which at this point doesn't seem to be going very far, very rapidly, which is a good thing, which is the equivalent of about 60% of Vermont Yankee's annual operating budget, a new tax package on them. So folks, if you're interested in any of that, contact Representative Olson, who'll be able to help you out with that. On the net metering, we have made some improvements, and one of the things I think was the biggest improvement, there were questions about if Bob Stevens had a net meter, and I'm his neighbor, Mike Hebert, and he's crediting his account with his extra generation. He credits all of the fees and services on his bill. Someone still has to pay for that. That would be me, his next door neighbor, because I'm not doing it. So we have approved that there be a study to be done to see how the socialization of costs operate, and if in fact people with net metering are getting an unfair break, we'll look at doing some sort of an assessment on them so that everyone will pay their equal share. The bill, the RPS bill, Renewable Portfolio Standard that Sarah spoke about, we're getting a rewrite on that tomorrow. It will be changed dramatically from how it first came out. Some of the things that are going to occur is new generation will be generation that comes online after 2013. And in that bill, there's a goal to have 30% of our generation be new renewables in 2025, I believe, right, Sarah? 2025.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you look at, that speaks to new generation. The existing generation, if you add that on, it'll be 80% of our portfolio will be in renewables by 2025. I don't think anyone in this room doesn't want to be green. Anyone in this room doesn't want to be a clean environment, have a clean environment, but we also have to look at the reality of the costs of these things. Some of the most interesting testimony I heard was from David Hallquist. He's the CEO of Vermont Electric Co-op, and he came in last week and testified that part of the problem with having intermittent renewables is that they're intermittent. They just don't work all the time. It's not a base load form of energy. So we need to have a storage source for them. And at the current time, that storage source is about 24 cents a kilowatt. So if you take that and you add it to a quarter or 27 cents, you can see that you're getting up around 50 cents a kilowatt. So this could be a very expensive way to go. So there are some of us that are going to be urging that we go slow and easy. But in the bill, it's a very aggressive bill. The standard offer is going to be increased to 25 megawatts a year for the next 10 years. So there are, as probably is not a surprise to anybody, there are differences between perspectives between Sarah and I and how we look at energy and what's going on with energy. The reality of 485, the solid waste disposal, whether you think it's a good plan or not, we do need a plan. Our landfills are closing and there's no place to put the stuff. So we are working very hard, and that bill changes daily. People come in and testify, and they'll point out things that are not probably in the best interest of business or best interest of the state of Vermont as a whole, and we've been modifying the bill significantly. So 485 and 468 at this point look nothing like when they were proposed, and hopefully we can keep making changes and improving on them. And I think that's about it. Hopefully people have questions after, and I'll stick around and talk to you.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we'll be hearing from Representative Richard Merritt.
Thank you. I represent Newfane, Townsend, and Marlboro in the legislature. I'm in my 10th year there, which seems like more than a decade some days and more like a few minutes other days. I sit on the Judiciary Committee, which I've been on for 10 years. Apparently they haven't decided to throw me off yet. I also chair a joint House-Senate committee, which has the fairly arcane name of the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. It was once described on Vermont public television as one of the most boring, but perhaps sometimes most important committees in Montpelier, which I think is probably a pretty good rap on it. We review all the departmental and agency rules, which is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of implementing what we in the legislature, with the governor's assent, pass. It's where the details are, and our job is to try to make sure the details are consistent with legislative intent and that Vermonters have been heard and have had a chance to actually comment on rules before they go into effect. Sometimes it's very mundane. I don't think we're going to have a big problem with a rule coming up on noxious weeds, but we had one on solid waste composting that took 5 sessions to thresh out all the issues from the public. In addition to those activities, I, along with David Dean from Westminster, who isn't able to be here today, are part of a sort of small core leadership team that the Speaker has that works with the Speaker, both the current Speaker and in my case, and David's the past Speaker, to plan essentially for activities during the session, the flow of bills for activity, etc., which is very interesting, often very challenging. In terms of the sort of core committee that I'm on, Judiciary, we actually this year, after 2 or 3 biennia where we've really been totally wrapped up in largely one major bill. The most recent one was a total restructuring of the entire Vermont state judiciary and all of its activities. Before that, we did one on juvenile justice, and we've had sort of a flow of these major bills. We've actually, I think this year, had a chance to do something that is exceedingly worthwhile and that the legislative process rarely gives you a chance to do, and that's actually step back and try to revisit some of the areas that we've worked on in recent years. So we've been working on reviewing the repeat DUI ignition interlock bill, which is designed to try to keep repeat DUI offenders from continuing in that pattern by using ignition interlock. It's still at something of a pilot stage in Vermont, but I think it's well worth expanding. It provides an alternative along with other punishment to keep people off the road when they're trying to drive drunk, but doing it without putting them in a $50,000 a year prison bed, which is often the only alternative we seem to have. We are working on reviewing a mortgage mediation bill that we put into effect a couple of years ago. We actually got ahead of the rest of the country. The major attention to abuses in the mortgage area that became a national issue, and indeed, you probably saw in the paper a couple of days ago that Vermont is getting, through the Attorney General's participation in the national litigation, is getting a $6.7 million settlement as part of a $25 billion national settlement. We were ahead of the game on that. We started requiring, well before the rest of the country had any focus on this, we started requiring that when you go into a mortgage mediation, you actually shockingly be able to demonstrate that you have the right to be there, that you hold the note and that the note has been properly assigned to you, which seemed to come as a shock to some in the industry. We also required participation by the court to ensure that there was some dispassionate oversight of that. Although we've made a lot of progress in that area, I think the testimony we've taken this year shows that there's still a need for further work in that area, because some people, unfortunately, the larger national servicers and lenders and just so don't seem to get it, that they need to walk into a mediation being able to demonstrate that they do hold the note and that they know how much is at issue and that they know what the remediation techniques available are. So we're working on some of those areas. I guess what I'd like to do, though, is just very briefly say that I think the good news, and you got an example of how it functions with the two prior speakers who have somewhat different views on the same issues, sit on the same committee, are of different parties. But the good news is in Vermont, despite the partisan differences that we have and the policy differences we have, we actually have a legislature which shockingly in the national context works. We have a legislature where we passed out of the House already this year, very, very quickly, 2 bills that I think before the session anyone would have predicted were going to become the source of huge controversy and huge delay. One directly affects the institution we're sitting in, the mental health revisions resulting from the state hospital having to be closed finally as a result of Hurricane Irene. We passed a bill that is going to put 16 beds in this facility, 6 in Rutland, and depending on whether you believe the House of Representatives or the governor, either 25 beds or 16 beds in a facility in the central part of the state, probably in the very Berlin vicinity. But we passed that bill after 10 years of delay, of loss of federal funding, and we did so with only 3 dissenting votes on the floor of the House. And that is, I think, a remarkable tribute to how Vermont does business. Even more amazing to me is the fact that we had legislative redistricting up this year. The House has completed its work on that. The bill was over in the Senate. Senator White chairs the committee that's going to be dealing with that. And to be really candid and to talk about real politics, my party happens to have 94 votes in the House. Representative Eberts has 48, and Representative Edwards has 5. And there are 3 independents of varying stripes. Now, the math in a 150-member body anywhere in this country would tell you that the party with 94 votes would come up with their redistricting plan, do everything they could to maximize their control of districts, potentially end up in court with a minority party feeling aggrieved, justifiably or unjustifiably, decided that this was something they didn't like and they were going to, by golly, have the court design a plan more to their taste. Anywhere else in the country, I think the majority party would have created a plan and rammed it through. In Vermont, we ended up with a bill that came out and got 138 to 4 votes on the House floor. The 4 votes against it, ironically, were all from the majority party. And it required, in order to resolve some population loss in the middle of the state, in the Rutland-Windsor County area, it required that 2 members ultimately go into a single-member district, 2 sitting members. We ended up with a proposal where one of them is a Democrat and one is a Republican. And the Republican happens to sit on the committee that drafted the plan. 138 to 4 vote. And the leaders of all 3 parties had a joint press conference afterwards to say how fair they thought it was. I don't think you'll see that anywhere else in this country. And I also would say that I think every bill, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, every bill that has come to the floor of the House this year has had a bipartisan vote out of the committee. And the large majority of them have had a unanimous vote out of their committee. So we have a system where people are listened to. The type of debate that you heard from the two previous speakers will go on, as it should. Ideas from both of them will probably end up being incorporated along with those of others. But we actually have a political system in Vermont that respects civility and that listens to people of all stripes and then tries to come to a solution that favors all Vermonters. And I think that's incredible testimony to everybody you're here from today and those who aren't here.
Thank you, Richard. Next, we're going to hear from Representative John Moran.
Thank you very much. I represent 6 towns: Wardsboro, Dover, Searsburg, Somerset, Stamford, and Reedsboro. And it's an honor to serve with the legislators in both Windham and Bennington County that I serve with. And to follow something Dick was just talking about, I serve on one of 14 committees in the House. So my responsibility as a citizen legislator, all of the citizen legislators here, is not only to keep track of what's going on in our committee, but to keep track on what's going on in 13 other committees. We do that without a staff and without an office. So we have our work cut out for us. And most of the work that takes place in the House is below the media level, unless you're having a deer head taken off the wall in the committee rooms. Basically, the stuff that takes place happens in the committee room and the work that goes on in the committee room. And I serve on a committee that really has 3 charges. The title of my committee is General, Housing and Military Affairs. And so the charges obviously are housing and military affairs, and I'll talk a little bit about general in a second. On the military affairs, we oversee the National Guard, we oversee the Veterans Administration, so we have to deal with the fact of stuff in terms of education for veterans when they return from different engagements overseas, and also to deal with the issues that veterans need to have dealt with when they come back. The Housing Committee, post-Irene, obviously brings a lot of attention to many things. Number one, we've taken a lot of testimony. We're dealing strongly with homelessness that is caused by Irene, but also was there before Irene. So we're dealing with mobile homes that have been destroyed, regular stick-built homes that have been destroyed, and also people who've lost their housing because their apartments are gone. So we have a major challenge for us to deal with the whole issue of homelessness and housing in the state of Vermont. We're trying to create a registry of some sort on rental apartments available, so when we have a crisis like we have with Irene, we know where apartments are available for people, because part of the problem was people who lost their housing didn't really know how to find rental apartments. We also are dealing with the whole issue of abandoned mobile homes, either because they're uninhabitable or people just had to move out of them. And so we realize that affordable housing is never going to be solved at the market level. It's not a market solution. It's a combination of the free enterprise system and subsidies and working with the federal and state government to create housing that's affordable. And it's such a tight market that we really have our challenges cut out for us, not just us, but all the people in the legislature. So we are working very closely on that. Part of my responsibility, our responsibility on my committee, is what we call looking at the basic needs budget. What we do is we try to figure out what it costs to live in the state of Vermont, and that's called the basic needs budget that we oversee. And out of that comes what we call the livable wage. And we work with the sustainable job growth people to try to find out what people need to earn to live comfortably, or live not comfortably, basically in the state of Vermont. And part of the problem is we see that the gap between what housing costs and what the median income is so large that a lot of people cannot afford, in a free market system, the housing that they need to live in. So it's a real challenge for the state of Vermont to meet the housing needs and the income needs of the workers in the state of Vermont. One of the bills we passed out of my committee, which is a very helpful bill, is an anti-discrimination bill in terms of housing development, which means that you cannot refuse to have housing developed because the income level of the people who may live in that house you may be concerned about. That is not a permissible thing to do. We had the support of the construction industry, the allied general contractors, because this is a job growth creation bill. It's not only anti-discrimination, but it's also the possibility to create jobs because we're creating more housing. The other committee I serve on, the other charge of my committee, is what I call the general charge. And what we do on my committee is we get what nobody else will take or guess. So we get a very eclectic gathering of legislation that comes to my committee. For example, we oversee the Department of Liquor Control, so we develop a lot of alcohol bills. And part of what we're trying to do in my committee is to create commerce within the state of Vermont. So we are very supportive of Vermont-grown industries, of distilleries and winemakers and beer makers, and try to push our product and push the economy. I serve in the ski area of the state, and part of the thing we worked hard was to pass legislation for the wine festival we have down in Mount Snow area. We also attempt to push very hard for the ski industry and the tourism industry. They also, on my committee, for some reason, we get a lot of bills that have to do with burials, dead bodies, crypts, crematoriums. And between the alcohol bills and the burial bills we deal with, we're going to rename ourselves the Spirits Committee. As a matter of fact, one of the bills we have in my committee right now is a green burial bill, which we're going to have to deal with, which is a natural burial in a property. So that's an example of some of the kind of bills we get. We get all labor legislation. So anything that has to do with working Vermonters, and not just union issues, but it has to do with basic wages, has to do with work breaks, has to do with issues that affect working Vermonters who do not have the protection of labor unions. So we work on many bills that have to do with basic working rights for Vermonters. I think I covered most, two more things that are important to me. One is, we passed a few years ago in my committee a bill that I'm very proud of. And what that bill had to do with was recognition of Native Vermont Indian tribes. And this was very important because there's been an issue in the state of Vermont for financial reasons, but for also identity reasons, that we have not correctly identified and accepted tribes within the state of Vermont. And the attempts to do this in the past have been sort of top-down. As the wording would be among the Native Americans, it was a Euro-American answer to a Native American issue. And so what we did a few years ago, instead of us trying to say, these are the people we'll identify as Vermont Native American Indian tribes, we will set up the process that you self-identify. We will set up the process where the Native Vermont Indian tribes identify themselves. And as long as they follow the process, then they come to us, and then we will approve it as a legislature. As I said in the past, our governor stepped out and said, this tribe is recognized by me. The next governor undid that recognition. There was a lot of tension within the different tribes within Vermont saying, you can't really tell who we are because we have to decide it ourselves. And so what we did accomplish is this. Last year we identified the Nulhegan and the Elnu tribes in the state of Vermont. And this year we'll have two more bills coming before our committee and the Senate committee, Vince Luzzi's committee, to work on the identification. This is so important because it gives the Native American Vermonters the right to identify themselves as a tribe. It gives them the right to sell their artifacts, which right now, for them to try to sell their artifacts as, quote, Abenaki artifacts, would end up with a 10-year prison sentence or a $250,000 fine. So because we do this recognition, now they have the right to identify themselves by their identity and to sell their artifacts. This isn't giving anybody land rights or casino rights. That's not what this is about. This is about state identification for a group of people who have a history of not being treated well in the state of Vermont. And now this is our chance to do what's right by them. And so that's one of the things my committee has done and I'm very proud of. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Representative Valerie Stewart.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting us. Really glad to be here. I serve on the House Education Committee, and I am a freshman legislator. So this is my second year of my first biennium, and I represent Brattleboro District 1. And I'd just like to say a little bit about what my committee is focusing on this year. The top two issues are the same issues that we focused on last year, which are addressing the education achievement gap, which is largely based on socioeconomic inequity, and restructuring education governance at a state level. On the subject of the achievement gap, those of us on the House Education Committee were glad to hear the governor call attention in his budget address to the importance of reducing the achievement gap. Since poor and low-income students constitute roughly 1/3 of Vermont's children, their poor education outcomes have and will continue to have a lasting negative impact on our state's economic and social health. According to a report by the Vermont Department of Education on the results of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, Vermont students eligible for free and reduced price lunch who were tested in reading and math during 4th and 8th grade averaged 19 points lower than their more affluent peers. One exciting new initiative in this area that shows great promise is the Vermont Blueprint to Close the Achievement Gap. This program, which the Shumlin administration heartily endorses, promotes the implementation of best educational practices, capitalizes on Vermont's educational resources, and responds to our state's unique educational challenges. And basically what the Blueprint really focuses on is helping Vermont's struggling readers. And they see that as a cornerstone to helping to close the achievement gap. And a couple of their proposals to help close the achievement gap are assuring effective literacy learning beginning in preschool and continuing through to success in college or career, and very interestingly, working with Vermont's higher educational institutions to create a model course of study in K through 12 reading instruction, including best practices for teaching reading to young people with specific learning disabilities. Our committee will continue to examine how we can create legislation that will bring to life the characteristics of effective schools as outlined in a Vermont Department of Education study entitled Roots of Success, Effective Practices in Vermont Schools, and some of the key characteristics of schools that are successful and help less successful students are the belief that all students can succeed, schools that have a supportive school climate, and schools with effective leadership. And on that point, last year, based on many hours of testimony that shows that schools with effective leaders or principals do better in terms of educating their students and also closing the achievement gap, we passed a principal mentoring bill, which basically says that every new principal will receive during his or her first 2 years of mentoring that will help them be a more effective principal. Another thing that we are working on in response to some of the kind of research I just alluded to is we lifted the pre-cap last year, or the cap rather, last year on pre-kindergarten education, so that every community in Vermont now has equal access to quality pre-K education. And we will continue to work on other aspects of this issue in order to assure that every Vermont child receives an equal start. Improving teacher quality is another area we see as really important, and this year our committee is considering legislation that would ensure every new teacher in Vermont would also receive a mentor during the first few years of their educational career. And now on a totally different subject, and possibly a more controversial one, our committee has worked last year and this year on the subject of restructuring education governance at a state level. H 440 would change the position of the Commissioner of Education to a Secretary of Education appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. Currently, as many of you know, the governor appoints the state board, and the state board of education appoints the commissioner. Under the new model, a Secretary of Education appointed by the governor would be in charge of the Agency of Education, which would replace the Department of Education, and the secretary would have a seat in the governor's cabinet and be responsible for our state's $1.3 billion education budget, which is currently administered by the State Board. The purpose of this piece of legislation is to provide a mechanism for holding someone accountable for our state's educational success every 2 years. It is supported by both the current governor and former Governor Jim Douglas. Interestingly, on that subject, we recently heard testimony from the chair of the Connecticut Commission on Educational Achievement, and that commission was formed to develop recommendations regarding how Connecticut could narrow the state's achievement gap, which is, interestingly enough, the highest in the nation. One of the commission's recommendations is to strengthen state leadership and accountability for education, and to do so by permitting the governor to appoint the Secretary of Education. And that just a couple of last things. We were very excited to hear the governor express interest in his budget address at the beginning of the session in expanding and funding dual enrollment opportunities. Dual enrollment makes it possible for high school juniors and seniors to receive credit for college courses. It makes higher education more affordable for low and middle income students, as well as students who are the first generation in their family to attend college. Last week, we saw the first draft of the governor's proposal, which proposes to give high school juniors and seniors who meet certain readiness threshold requirements up to 4 vouchers for dual enrollment courses during those last 2 years of high school. This means that these young people would graduate with 4 college credits, which would cost them far less than they would in a college setting. And that's something everybody's really worried about, is the cost of a college education. I'm happy to say that here in Brattleboro, we have a really great dual enrollment program. At the high school, we offer 33 courses in different areas to roughly 250 students, and our collegiate high school is actually a model that the state is considering. We're considering having the state emulate. And then lastly, I think it's really exciting about the CCV and VTC initiative that the governor proposed to help strengthen Brattleboro's economy. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, former Brattleboro Select Board Martha O'Connor is leading the search commission to find a suitable location here in Brattleboro for the CCV VTC Center. And those of us in the Windham County delegation hope to arrange a meeting with Martha in the near future to see how we can help with this promising project. We are really excited about this wonderful opportunity to bring students, faculty, staff, and more dollars into downtown Brattleboro. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. Now I'd like to turn it over to our first senator, Peter Galbraith.
The Senate is, of course, 1/5 the size of the House, and so while from House members you hear a great deal of specialization, we inevitably deal, because we're a small body, with a broader range of issues. That said, I'm going to focus my remarks on those I think are most interesting to this group, which is issues of economic development, and as it happens, I serve on the Economic Development Committee. First, we have had a focus on Windham County. Last year, we held a hearing here on Windham County after the Vermont Yankee. It wasn't debating the merits of VY, but looking at the state's decision to close it. Obviously, it's a different situation this year. Nonetheless, we are going to keep a focus on Windham County, on the particular economic problems here. There was a $50,000 earmark for the Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategy. The Windham Workforce Investment Board is the only WIB in the state of Vermont to have its own specific appropriation, and that's a sign of the focus that we have had on that issue. A second issue I think that is critically important to Windham County and the state of Vermont is legislation we passed last year, but I don't want to lose sight of it, which is speeding up the process of bringing broadband throughout the state of Vermont. And frankly, I think that's critical to attracting high-quality jobs, enabling people who wish to live in our beautiful state to be able to do so, because in the 21st century you can do a lot from home. But I want to devote the rest of my remarks to just one issue, which was in the paper on Saturday, weekend paper, and which I think is critically important. And that is the question of whether the state should consider the acquisition of an interest in Vermont's transmission lines. On Thursday, I put forward an amendment in the Senate to the Budget Adjustment Act, which was drafted by Vince Aluzzi, a Republican and chairman of the committee, Tim Ash, progressive, and myself. So a tripartisan approach that said this should be studied. Not that we should do it, but we should study it. Let me explain what is at stake. Vermont's two largest utilities are planning a merger. The utilities in Vermont own Velco, which runs the transmission system, and Transco, which owns the infrastructure. Now, when the merger takes place, Green Mountain Power will own and control 80% of Transco and Velco. Who owns Green Mountain Power? Gaz Metro, a Quebec company. And who owns Gaz Metro? The pension fund of the province of Quebec. What else does so in essence, a government agency in Quebec. What else does the government of Quebec control and own? Hydro-Quebec. So what is their economic interest in Vermont's transmission system? It is in transmitting power, not to the state of Vermont, because we're a small market, to the rest of New England. And these utilities, of course, have power of eminent domain. In New Hampshire, if you followed it, the legislature is stripping them of that power to try to derail the Northern Corridor project. So the issue here is who controls our state's key infrastructure and how are they going to use it? Our idea is to look at whether, as a condition of the merger, there's no eminent domain here, as a condition of the merger, which we do not have to approve, that the state should be given the opportunity to acquire an interest, a 51% interest in the transmission lines based on book value. Again, no coercion. The companies have, and we're addressing a problem of monopoly. Now, the moment this idea of a study emerged, the lobbyists went wild. And this is the Republican Vince Aluzzi has been called a radical, dangerous, crazy idea. Well, you know when that happens that the idea probably has merit. Why are they so concerned? Because the transmission company, Velco and Transco, have a guaranteed, to the utilities, a guaranteed 9.7% rate of return. Every dollar that they put into that infrastructure, they get back 9.7%. It is, and if there's a problem, if it requires another $100 million in investment, 9.7 on the $100 million. Of course, there's also no alternative to this transmission network. It's something everybody has to use. It's like a toll road. You have to drive every day, and there's no other way around it. So you can't send electricity wirelessly by satellite or anything else. So that's really what is at stake. If the state were to acquire it, we can borrow money at 3%. We get a significant rate of return. Again, we want to look at this. We aren't saying we definitely should do it. We simply had an amendment to study it. Boy, you should have seen the reaction to the amendment to study, to try to kill it. Not the idea of doing it, simply the idea of studying it. All sorts of arguments invented. But what I can say is this is a vanishing opportunity, because if the merger's in May and we haven't even studied it, that opportunity will be lost, and we'll be talking about this the way we did about the Connecticut River dams. So anyhow, I just wanted to, I suspect that this will be an issue that will gain a lot of discussion, a lot of traction. It's a huge issue for the state of Vermont, and that's my introduction to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Now I'd like to introduce Senator Jeanette White.
Thank you. I'm going to be I'm going to try and be very brief here, so start waving your hands if I'm going on too long. In the Senate, we serve on two committees, a morning committee and an afternoon committee. In the morning, I serve on Judiciary, and in the afternoon, I chair the Government Operations Committee. In a minute, I'll tell you what we're doing in them. I also am on two non-standing committees. One is called Government Accountability Committee, and our goal is to look at the way we do things in the state. Not what we do, but how we do them. It's an ongoing committee, and because we think that we can set up systems that allow us to do things better. For example, once we have a program in place, then we add another program. We never seem to go back and look at the programs that we've already put in place, and should they continue to exist, we just keep increasing or decreasing funding, but we never really look at them in total. So we're looking at that. The other committee that I'm chairing is a separate redistricting or reapportionment committee that Dick Merrick talked about. The way the process works is that the House does the House redistricting and the Senate does the Senate redistricting. We, of course, have less controversy, I believe, because we aren't dealing with smaller districts, and it could affect Windham County. The growth has all been up in Chittenden and Franklin counties, and we had some growth, but not enough to make a huge difference. But we have to adjust the representation so that it's essentially one person, one vote. That's what our Constitution says. On Judiciary in the morning, Dick talked some about what they're doing over there on their side. One of the things we're looking at is how do we reduce our prison population? We have a huge prison population, and we, as a committee, and many people in the state don't believe that all those people belong in prison, nor do they belong as identified criminals. If you look in the paper, you'll see somebody now has their 5th DLS, driving with license suspended. And you say, oh my God, these are really bad people. There are 20,000 people in the state of Vermont that have suspended licenses that are driving out there. About 97% of them are not criminal at all. They got a speeding ticket, they couldn't afford to pay the ticket, so they didn't pay their ticket. Now they get a suspended license, now they get another ticket, and it's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. When you get your 5th one like that, it becomes a criminal suspension. It didn't start as a criminal suspension at all, so it spirals, and what we're trying to do is look at how we can get those people back to being non-criminal citizens. And their fines are really high by this time, and they can't afford it. They couldn't afford it in the first place, which is why they keep getting suspended license violations again. In government operations, we're dealing with the issue of open meetings and public records. And it sounds pretty easy. It's a really thorny issue. For example, the other day we started talking about public records. What's public and what's private? Your information, your birth date, your race, your gender, your financial information, all of that, is that public? Is it private? If it sits in the town clerk's office down here in Brattleboro, what is public and private? And every time we think we've got some kind of an answer, somebody throws another zinger at us, but we're working on it. We are doing something very interesting this year. The House Committee on Government Operations last year tried to go paperless. So the state bought iPads for them. And now we're the second committee, we're the sister committee of them, and we're trying to do it. You should see it, it's like a kindergarten class. We're in there and people are testifying and we're banging on the screens of our iPads trying to get up our bills and do it, but we're learning. And it sounds expensive, but because each iPad costs $600, just the pieces of paper we get every single day on our desks for 1 year, each of us, is $450. So if we can go somewhat paperless, we are ahead of the game. The issue is, I think was when Mike Hebert was talking, he was talking about how the bill changes every day. Sometimes it changes 3 times in the same day. And the problem is, how do you get that information out there so that when you come to testify on a bill, or you're looking at a bill, you know what we're currently talking about. It isn't the bill that was introduced at all. So you come up to testify, or you write to me and you talk about this bill, and I'm saying, oh, we threw that bill out a long time ago. So that's part of the problem that we're dealing with on the putting it on the internet. How do you get that I guess it'd be called on-time reporting so that you can actually know what we're doing? And I'm just going to say one other thing that Dick Merrick talked about. For 9 years now, I have been on the Mental Health Oversight Committee. We have been working on a plan to replace the Vermont State Hospital for 9 years. And we finally, we were forced into doing it because of Irene. It was closed down. And I am not going to go into any detail, but I am so happy to finally see that we have an administration that recognizes the Brattleboro Retreat as a premier mental health institution in the state, and that they are part of the plan now. There's still work ahead of us to do, and the bill has not passed the Senate yet. I'm sure we'll have our way with it and change it, and it'll be a much better bill than it was when it passed the House. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for a few questions. Yes, sir.
I'm Alan Dan, and I'm here with Jane Wood, whom you've already met, new with the Commons, and Olga Peters, who is our East reporter. Jeanette just touched again on a subject that's been bothering me for a long time, and I think I really would like to ask Dick Merrick, what else beyond the ignition interlock, which prevents people from going to prison, what else are we doing to get people out of prison who have no reason on God's earth for being there in the first place? And it's an enormous number of people.
It's also an enormously complex problem to get them out. Yeah, there are several things. I mean, first of all, I think we have to do a better job of screening who we put in, because as you point out, there are people who have committed a crime who are deserving of some form of punishment. But the reflexive answer is, let's put them in jail. And you hear that consistently. You know, why don't you throw them in jail? Why are these people out walking around? Well, the reason they're out walking around, and the reason some of them shouldn't be in jail, is because we spend $50,000 a year to have somebody in our prison system. We've gone to contracts with out-of-state private prison operators because we don't have capacity even in the state to incarcerate everybody who currently is under the control of the Department of Corrections. And in some cases, we end up sending them out worse than they came in. That simply doesn't make a lot of sense. One of the ways we could get a number of people out, and we've actually worked on a lot of facets of this. A lot of people have been in the prison system simply as a very temporary holding device when they're first arrested. That makes sense for the ones who really represent danger to the community, but it's extremely expensive to shuffle people in and out for 3 or 4 days. We have tried to work on that issue of not requiring that all those people be held unless they represent a significant reason to be held. Another area that is keeping a lot of people in who frankly are ready to be out right now, have served their minimum time, have had a clean record, is housing. We don't have adequate housing. And I'm not sure what the number is currently, but it was in the range of 200 to 300 people who were ready to go out, but had not been released simply because we couldn't find a place for them to live. And that is just economically absurd, that you have somebody in a $50,000 a year location because you can't find a reasonably priced and reasonable alternative for them in the community. So things like that are really where we're trying to put a considerable amount of our focus, is just to intelligently manage the system. The population has started to help a little bit. One other area that we worked on several years ago that I think is having an impact, we had a huge population in Vermont, and by national standards, of people who were on probation. The reason for that was the courts would put someone not on what's called term probation, where you have a finite amount of time that you're on probation. They would put them on indeterminate probation. And essentially, you would stay on probation, potentially, until you died. Those people resulted in probation officers having what, on the face of it, were incredibly high caseloads. But the reality was, after a certain period of time, that it became nothing more or less than paper shuffling for many of them. But the risk was, because you were on probation and because you had conditions of probation, that there were a number of things that you could do that if any of us who aren't on probation did them, would either be a civil infraction or nothing, or we'd be told, what, go home and sleep it off, in the case of public intoxication, for example. But your probation provision said you couldn't consume alcohol, or you couldn't be drunk, or you couldn't associate with certain people. You might have been out for 10 or 15 years and had been completely clean, but suddenly you were potentially subject to being reincarcerated for a probation violation. So we cleaned that up, and you know, theoretically these people were supposed to be reviewed and taken off probation, but guess what? People in the state's attorney's office are busy, and getting to those was probably the lowest thing on their priority list. So we have tremendously cut the number of people who are on what I think was a totally meaningless probation status, and have accordingly, we've cut the number of people who are being reincarcerated for things that wouldn't be a violation for anybody else in the community. So there are things we can do just by thinking through where the core problems are. And then, you know, again, avoiding what is always the temptation. No legislator ever gets in trouble for adding to a criminal sentence. Somebody will always think that's a great idea. And the only one who doesn't is the public defender. But they always tell us, well, we'll manage to defeat this in court. We need to think intelligently about how we use what is really a very expensive and limited resource.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Jerry?
Quick question on the state hospital. You mentioned that it's been, I think, 10 years or 9 years that we were uncertified but still providing the services. How much did that cost the state we otherwise been made up by Medicaid, Medicare, that sort of thing?
I think the federal funding...
$7 million a year is what we were losing by not having the state hospital certified.
So $60 or $70 million overall.
Right.
Thank you.
Over here, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm Dave Altstaff with the Wyndham Workforce Investment Board again, and just have a comment and question I'll open up to any legislator. Again, we just want to appreciate the support that our House and Senate members have made to workforce development and economic development in the Wyndham area. It's really important. And just to give you a quick thing, I just want to mention what the WIB does is that we exist to help employers and workers access job training. So we're here to help you. And just, you know, very excited to hear about the possibility of a CCV, Vermont Technical College campus in downtown Brattleboro. And as Valerie mentioned, it's a great economic development opportunity for downtown to bring students and more vitality down there. But it's also an opportunity to expand program and course offerings so that we can do more in our area to help individuals, both youth and adults, increase their skills and to help employers get those skilled workers. And so I just wanted to ask our legislators, what is the chances of this happening soon, and what's your vision for this campus and how we can build skills?
Who wants to take this one?
General.
General. Well, this could fall to General, but I think he's left. He saw it coming. Well, I can tell you that there's a difference between having a building and having a center downtown and getting programs downtown. Getting a center, a physical center, is going to be the easiest part. And getting programming here, what you're doing is you're depending on the institutions. I don't know if you know this, but for 11 years I was the UVM Continuing Education Coordinator for the southern half of the state. And getting programs from the state colleges, UVM, and getting them to work together and to work with the private institutions in the state. We have World Learning here, we have Marlboro. We could have some really exciting programming here, but that's a real challenge to get them to offer the programs here. It's something that I'm very excited about, and because of having worked for UVM for 11 years, it's something that I want to jump into with both feet, I guess, and see if we can't get the institutions to offer more programs here. This just happened like 3 weeks ago at the budget address. It caught everybody off guard, probably including Peter's speechwriter. I don't know. But I should say the governor.
Thank you very much. One more question.
Could I make a follow-up comment to that, please?
Sure.
I'm just going to add quickly as an ambassador for President of Marlboro College, Ellen McCullough-Lovell, who I know did communicate with Peter, and Marlboro would very much like to be involved, including the Graduate Center and the undergrad campus.
Yeah, I talked with her yesterday, on Friday, when she was up at the State House.
Rob, you have a question?
One quick comment. Thanks, Jared. I would just like to thank the delegation for all their amazing work, not only for the Brattleboro retreat, but for all the other topics that you've heard about today. It's been a long dialogue about the retreat, 9 years at State Hospital. It's a good decision. It's a much-needed decision. It's complex. It's still not finished, but the trend is good. And the other thing I'd like to make a comment about the retreat is we're not just a clinical organization, one of America's best psychiatric hospitals, but we also added 150 jobs over the last couple of years, with more to come. So we are definitely an employer of great repute in the community. Thank you. Jerry.
Thank you. It's been a very informative session. I'd like to thank Molly Burke, Sarah Edwards, Mike Hebert, Richard Merrick, John Moran, Valerie Stewart, Peter Galbraith, and Jeanette White for coming and giving us a little input into what's going on up in Montpelier. And now I'll turn it over to Jerry.
Real quick, folks, I know we usually like to get you out of here at 9, and we've all got to get back to work. Just a couple of notes. You have some green sheets of paper on your tables, one of which is pointing out that there's something called Employers' Day at the State House that's coming up April 4th. And there's a whole program that's put together, including having lunch and hearing from Governor Shumlin and Lieutenant Governor Scott, as well as from Shaf Smith, the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and maybe some of the guys that are here today. You're on the list anyway to be available for chatting, so be prepared. Right now, I'd like to thank you all really for coming. Echoing again the thanks to our legislators for being here. Thanking the retreat again for their wonderful hospitality, and congratulations on the good news. It's so wonderful to hear that. And the work that the legislators did on your behalf, on Brattleboro's behalf. We also want to thank you all for supporting the Chamber. Today is an example, and throughout the year, the way that you all do support us, and we're here for you, and we will be here for you. Just give us a call, stop by. Thanks for coming, folks, and have a great day.